Las Vegas, 1972. The king of rock and roll walks into the Hilton Hotel lobby, alone, unguarded, and unrecognized. A young manager mistakes him for a trespasser and orders him out. The staff watch in stunned silence as Elvis Presley, calm, almost smiling, turns around and does something no one will ever forget. The marble floor held the day's heat like a secret. August 1972, Las Vegas Hilton lobby, 10:45 p.m. The fountain murmured under a ceiling of gold light. Cigarette smoke ribboned toward the chandeliers, and the revolving door sighed each time a gambler drifted out to chase one more miracle. Elvis walked in quietly, denim jacket, dark glasses, hair braided by the neon. Beside him, Red West floated 2 steps back, scanning corners the way bodyguards do when they want to be invisible. The desk clerk barely glanced up. The band upstairs had ended dinner service an hour ago. The city's pulse was in that soft, dangerous lull between noise and something about to happen. He could have come with the entourage, the flash, the suits. He didn't. He wanted the room to feel like a room, not a stage. Elvis paused near the fountain and listened. Ice clinking in tumblers, a bellhop laughing too loud, a woman whispering into a payphone. He breathed in. He was home and not home, a legend and a shadow. How often do we forget that even famous people crave ordinary air? Red angled toward the elevators, but a young manager intercepted them, a clipboard pressed to his chest like a badge. Evening. Guests only beyond this point. His name tag read Carl, the letters crisp and new. He didn't lift his eyes long enough to recognize the face behind the glasses. Policy was policy. He had been told to hold the line. What do you do when the rulebook in your hands feels heavier than the person in front of you? Elvis smiled a little, polite Southern. We're headed to rehearsal, son. The voice had a low warmth that usually made rooms soften. Not tonight. Carl gestured toward the doors. I'm sorry, sir. It's a closed lobby after 10. We can't have people wandering around. 2 security guards materialized from the column shadows, their radios muttering static. The lobby went dead silent, the kind of silence that sharpens every eye and turns people into witnesses. The king of rock and roll, treated like a trespasser in his own house. Red's jaw flexed. Do you know who? Elvis touched his sleeve. Gentle. Don't. There was no heat in his gaze, only curiosity, as if this moment were giving him a chance to measure the temperature of the city he'd carried for years. He looked past Carl to the brass elevator doors and caught his reflection. A man trying to be simple in a place built to exaggerate. Distant slot machine chime, then a soft tape hiss, like a recorder clicking on. Guests noticed. A couple in evening wear slowed, whispers travelling like a ripple. A bellhop's eyes went wide, then cautious. Recognizing a legend isn't the same as deciding to say it out loud. Elvis kept his hands visible, palms easy. He nodded once to the guards as if to say, it's all right. In front of perhaps 200 onlookers, he let the moment breathe. The fountain kept whispering. The desert night leaned at the glass. Carl cleared his throat, heart thundering in a suit that suddenly felt a size too small. He was young, new, trying to protect something he didn't own. How quickly can fear of getting it wrong make us get it wrong? Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside, he said, softer now. The guard shifted closer. One reached, 2 fingers light on Elvis's sleeve. Elvis didn't pull away. He nodded again, a tiny bow that dignified everyone. Carl, the guards, the watchers. He turned toward the doors. Red bristled. But Elvis's hand landed on his shoulder, an old rhythm between men who had been through louder rooms than this. It's fine, he whispered. Let them do their job. Slow push on the manager's clipboard. Lobby air conditioner hum rising, then cutting to a hush. Outside, the desert air wrapped them in cool velvet. Neon spilled across the sidewalk like a river someone had forgotten to turn off. Red exhaled hard. They tossed you, E, in the Hilton. Elvis took off his glasses. The eyes were tired but bright, as if something playful had just arrived behind them. He studied the marquee blazing his name above the entrance, Elvis Presley, sold out, and smiled, small and private. Sometimes a man needs to be reminded what the room hears before he decides what to say. He looked back through the glass at the lobby, at Carl standing very still with the clipboard against his chest, at the watchers leaning on the edges of their own curiosity. Was this humiliation, or was it an opening? Was it possible that the most powerful choice in a noisy city was to answer with quiet? Red waited for the storm that never came. Elvis slipped the glasses into his jacket pocket and rolled his shoulders, loosening some music only he could hear. Faint click of a microphone turning on. Pre-lap, almost imagined. The city held its breath. The moon threw a pale rope across the hotel's high windows. Time slowed just enough to make a decision feel like destiny. He turned back to the doors. The Cadillac idled in a wash of neon. Red West sat behind the wheel, knuckles tight on the steering wheel, still angry enough to shake. Elvis leaned against the door, arms folded, staring back at the hotel that had just expelled him. His name still blazed above the entrance in 6-foot-tall gold bulbs. Elvis Presley, live tonight. And yet the lobby inside had treated him like a stranger. The contradiction burned quietly, the way dry heat burns at midnight. For a moment, no one spoke. The desert wind brushed the street like a slow drum roll. Red muttered, "You want me to go back in there? I'll straighten that kid out." Elvis smiled. "No, Red, we'll go back. But not like that." He didn't raise his voice. He softened it. Inside the car, silence thickened until the radio crackled on. Faint static, then a snippet of his own voice. An old recording of Can't Help Falling in Love. The sound hung in the air like a mirror. Elvis closed his eyes, listening to himself from years before, when everything had felt new, when people bowed not out of fear, but out of joy. He spoke without opening his eyes. "You know, Red, maybe they've forgotten what this music means. Maybe I have too." Red turned toward him, confusion and concern in equal measure. "You're not serious. They threw you out of your own hotel." Elvis opened his eyes, and the mischief returned. "Exactly, which means they don't expect what's coming next." He reached for the door handle. The click echoed like a gunshot in the quiet lot. Engine cuts, door opens, soft breeze and distant laughter fade. He walked back toward the revolving doors, the lights catching on the small silver cross at his neck. Each step was slow, deliberate, a man pacing himself for a kind of performance that no stage could ever hold. Red followed, protesting under his breath. At least tell me what you're doing." Elvis grinned, giving them a show they didn't buy tickets for. Inside, the lobby had half forgotten the incident. Guests chatted again, the slot machine bells resumed their careless jingles, and the young manager, Carl, was back behind the front desk, pretending to read the night ledger. But when the glass doors rotated open again, the sound of laughter melted. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Silence returned, sharp, expectant. Elvis walked to the same spot near the fountain, this time without hesitation. He nodded toward the small jazz trio that was packing their instruments near the restaurant archway. "Evening, boys," he said gently. They froze. One recognized him, eyes wide as though seeing a ghost. Elvis gestured to the upright bass. "You still know Can't Help Falling in Love, don't you?" The bassist's hand trembled as he lifted the bow. A soft note bloomed, almost shy. The pianist followed. Within seconds, the song that had echoed on the car radio returned to life. This time in real air, with real people watching. Elvis began to sing. His voice wasn't the thunder of the arenas or the electric tremor of the 1968 comeback. It was gentler, slower, heavy with something that only years can give a man. The sound climbed the marble walls and filled the spaces between every breath. Carl's clipboard slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a small slap. Bellhops froze mid-step. Guests gathered, unsure whether to applaud or pray. Even the fountain seemed to hush. How does one voice reclaim a room that tried to erase it? By the second verse, people were crying. Red leaned against a pillar, half smiling, half shaking his head. A waiter near the bar whispered. He came back. When the song ended, Elvis let the final note hang. a long, trembling ribbon of sound that seemed to touch the ceiling before dissolving into stillness. The crowd didn't know what to do, not at first. Then applause burst like thunder, echoing through the glass, spilling out onto the strip, applause swell. Then quick cut to quiet breath and heartbeat sound. Elvis looked straight at Carl, whose face had turned pale under the lights. "Son," he said softly, "don't ever mistake quiet for weakness." He smiled, handed the microphone to the stunned pianist, and turned toward the elevators. The moment lingered like perfume. Every person in that lobby knew they had seen something that would never happen again. But as Elvis disappeared upstairs, the lesson of that night was only beginning to unfold. The elevator doors closed with a soft metallic sigh. For a few seconds, the hum of the machinery drowned out the world below, the whispers, the disbelief, the lingering echo of applause. Red West stood beside Elvis, eyes wide with a mix of confusion and awe. "You just turned the Hilton lobby into a concert hall," he muttered. Elvis chuckled quietly, a sound equal parts relief and melancholy. "Sometimes, Red, a man's got to remind the world why they ever let him through the front door." Upstairs, the hallway was dim. A single maid's cart stood abandoned, its radio still playing faint country tunes from the service wing. Elvis walked past the suites without a word, his mind looping through what had just happened. For the first time in months, he hadn't performed for money, for cameras, or for charts. He'd sung simply to reclaim a piece of his humanity. When does music stop being about fame and start becoming about dignity? In his suite, he poured a glass of water and stared out the window at the strip below. Endless light, endless hunger. Downstairs, a few hundred people were still talking about him, still shaking their heads in disbelief. Somewhere in the crowd, Carl stood frozen near the front desk, the clipboard now useless at his feet. His mind replayed every second, the gentle tone in Elvis's voice, the effortless forgiveness in his eyes. Carl didn't feel embarrassed anymore. He felt changed. The next morning, before sunrise, Carl knocked on the suite door. Red answered, half expecting trouble. But Carl wasn't holding a complaint or a report. He was holding 2 tickets. "Mr. Presley," he said, voice trembling, "I'd be honored to watch you perform tonight. I didn't know last night who I was talking to, but I won't forget again." Elvis appeared behind Red, hair loose, still in a robe. He smiled, genuine this time. "You didn't have to come up here, son." Carl swallowed hard. "I did. You could have yelled, made a scene, but you sang instead. Nobody does that." Elvis reached into a side table and pulled out a small white scarf, embroidered with his initials in gold thread. He pressed it into Carl's hands. "Keep this, not as a souvenir, just a reminder. When you get power, use it gentle. Soft strum of guitar. Morning light spills through curtains." Downstairs, the Hilton staff had already heard about the scarf, the performance, the apology. The story spread faster than room service. Guests stopped by the front desk, asking if it was true. By noon, even the local radio was whispering about it. Elvis Presley serenaded the Hilton staff after being mistaken for a trespasser, one announcer said. "Only in Vegas." Red leaned against the balcony rail, watching the city wake up. "You know E," he said. "That song last night. People will be talking about it for years." Elvis nodded slowly, eyes on the desert horizon. Maybe they'll remember it wasn't just a song. What makes a man truly royal? The crown, or the kindness he shows when no one's watching. Later that evening, Carl attended the show, sitting front row as promised. When Elvis took the stage, dressed in white with a cape that shimmered like starlight, he spotted the young manager in the audience. Their eyes met for half a second. Elvis gave a subtle nod before beginning his set. Every note that night carried the weight of grace. Fans screamed, women cried, flashes went off like fireworks, but Carl sat still, absorbing it all. Mid-show, Elvis paused. He looked out over the crowd of 20,000 people and said, "If you've ever been told you don't belong, remember, sometimes that's where your story begins." The arena went dead silent, and for the first time, Carl understood the full meaning of the night before. But years later, long after Elvis was gone, that quiet lesson would carve its name into the walls of the Hilton itself. The years would remember that night as the lobby lesson, though no newspaper printed it that way at the time. Inside the Hilton, the story spread from bellhop to bartender until it became a kind of whispered gospel. Elvis didn't shout. He sang. By the second evening, even the hotel director, James Porter, had heard. He called Carl into his office, the one with the smoked glass door and the heavy smell of cigars. "You embarrassed this hotel," Porter started, but his tone softened halfway through, and somehow the man you embarrassed turned it into a hymn. Carl stood straight, unsure whether to apologize again or simply nod. "Sir, Porter raised a hand. "Don't. You learn something money can't teach." Instead of punishment came mercy. That evening, backstage before the show, Elvis tuned his Gibson quietly while Red checked the set list. The hall pulsed with anticipation, 20,000 fans, the air thick with perfume and camera flashes. Yet Elvis's focus wasn't on the stage. He kept glancing toward the entrance corridor, waiting. At 8:45, Carl appeared, nervous, holding the same gold-lettered scarf Elvis had given him that morning. Security tried to wave him back, but Elvis spotted him. "Let him through," he said gently. Carl approached, eyes wide as if stepping into a cathedral. "Mr. Presley, I just wanted to thank you again." Elvis shook his head. "No need, son. Just enjoy the show. Remember, every man gets his lobby moment. What you do after it decides who you become." SFXQ. Soft hum of crowd, tuning notes, curtain rope creak. When Elvis walked on stage, the roar shook the rafters. But under that sound, he carried something quieter. The memory of a young man's fear, the sting of rejection, and the strange calm that had replaced pride. Halfway through the concert, he paused between songs. The band fell silent. A single spotlight traced his face as he spoke into the mic. "I had a funny thing happen last night. Someone tried to throw me out of this hotel, but I reckon he was just protecting the place he loves. We all get that wrong sometimes." The audience laughed softly, unsure if he was joking. Then he smiled. "So tonight, I want to sing one for everyone who's ever been mistaken for less than they are." He began, "If I Can Dream." The arena went dead silent. The first verse rose like a confession, the kind that blurs the line between performer and pilgrim. Fans who'd come for spectacle found themselves in something sacred instead. Carl watched from the front row, the lights reflecting in his eyes. How does forgiveness sound when it's sung instead of spoken? When the song ended, the applause wasn't wild. It was reverent. People stood slowly, as if waking from prayer. Elvis nodded once, whispered, "Thank you," and left the stage. Backstage, he found Carl waiting near the dressing room door. Without words, Elvis placed a hand on his shoulder, then looked out at the hallway lined with crew, fans, and staff. "We're all just trying to keep the lights on in our little worlds, huh?" Carl nodded, overwhelmed. Elvis reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, the set list from that night. He signed the corner and handed it to Carl. "Hang on to that. Maybe one day, when this hotel forgets again, you can remind them." Carl blinked hard, holding the paper as if it was something alive. Later, he framed it in glass and kept it above his desk for the rest of his career. For Elvis, the night marked something unseen, a turning point in how he measured worth, not by ticket sales, not by headlines, but by how he treated the smallest moments of misunderstanding. He said to Red later, as they drove out toward the desert lights, "It's funny, Red. The more you get recognized, the more you need to earn it all over again." The desert wind filled the car windows, carrying the hum of the strip behind them. What if the truest measure of fame is how softly you can walk through it? But long after the concerts ended, that single act of humility would leave a mark carved deeper than gold or marble. When the final lights dimmed that night, Las Vegas was still awake. Out on the strip, laughter and slot bells tangled in the air. Inside the Hilton, a smaller hum began, staff whispering, retelling the story of the king's return to grace. What had started as a moment of embarrassment had become a quiet legend passed from shift to shift. In the housekeeping wing, someone pressed record on a pocket cassette player and captured the talk of two bellhops. He just walked in and started singing. Man, I swear you could feel it in your chest. That tape, labelled only Lobby, OG 72, would surface years later in a collector's box. The hiss of it still carries the gasp of the crowd. Carl sat alone in the staff cafe, the signed set list resting beside his untouched coffee. Each time the door opened, he half expected Elvis to appear again. But the king was upstairs, writing in a leather notebook he carried everywhere. The words, later found among his things, read, "Kindness is the only encore that never ends." Even in his private notes, Elvis wasn't talking about music. He was talking about people. By morning, the local press had caught the rumor. Reporters phoned the Hilton asking for comment, but management kept silent. Only a single quote leaked from a junior clerk. He sang in the lobby. No cameras, no stage, just grace. Why do the moments with no audience echo the longest? Weeks later, fan club newsletters began printing versions of the story. Some called it The Night the King Forgave, others The Lobby Miracle. None were entirely accurate, yet all carried the same heartbeat. A year after Elvis's passing, Hilton staff placed a small bronze plaque near the fountain. It read, "Here, in 1972, Elvis Presley reminded us that greatness is grace in motion." Guests still pause there, listening to the faint trickle of water under hotel chatter. Tourists take photos, unaware that somewhere in the archives, a cassette hums with proof of what really happened. Carl kept working at the Hilton until the early 80s. When the hotel renamed itself, he fought to keep the plaque untouched. "It's not about fame," he told new staff. "It's about how you treat the man you don't recognize." Tape rewind sound, crossfade into faint audience applause. Each year, on August 14th, a handful of fans gather near that plaque. Some bring scarves, others hum Can't Help Falling in Love under their breath. The hotel doesn't advertise it, but the concierge always keeps a single white rose on the counter that night. In a city built on noise and spotlight, how does a single act of humility keep surviving? Silence answers louder than any crowd. Carl retired in 1990. When asked the proudest moment of his career, he didn't mention promotions or celebrity guests. He said only, "The night a man I threw out taught me what hospitality really means." Time blurred the edges of the memory, but every recording, every whisper carried the same rhythm. A lesson sung once in marble halls and replayed forever in the hearts that heard it. The legend of the lobby lived on, not as gossip but as a compass, and long after the neon faded, one final question remained. What did that lesson mean to Elvis himself? Dawn crept across the desert like a soft curtain being lifted. From his suite, Elvis watched the city dissolve into gold and silence. Below him, the same lobby that had once turned him away now shimmered with morning light. The marble looked almost gentle in the early hour. Red West entered quietly, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Didn't sleep, huh?" Elvis shook his head. "Couldn't. Kept hearing that fountain. It sounded like applause fading in slow motion." He walked to the balcony, robe fluttering in the wind, and looked down at the little plaque they'd already begun planning to mount. "Funny thing," he said, voice low. "You spend your life chasing crowns, and the one that matters ends up carved in brass at a hotel you don't even own." The king questioned his own throne. Inside, the television hummed with early news. A local anchor mentioned an unusual late-night serenade by Elvis Presley inside the Hilton lobby. No footage, no scandal. Just a soft headline that drifted away by noon. But for Elvis, it meant something larger. When does a story stop belonging to the man who lived it and start belonging to everyone who needs it? He sat at the piano near the window and began to play the melody of If I Can Dream. Slower this time, like he was rewriting it for himself. Red listened from the doorway, not daring to interrupt. "You know, Red," Elvis murmured. "That boy down there, Carl, he reminded me of me, scared of losing his place in a world that moves too fast." Red nodded. "You showed him how to slow it down." Elvis smiled faintly. "Maybe he showed me first." He closed the lid of the piano, slid his notebook across the table, and wrote the final line beneath the morning's date. "A crown shines brightest when it's lowered to help someone else stand taller." Years later, after his passing, that notebook page would be displayed behind glass at Graceland. Visitors still pause there, tracing the loop of his signature, whispering the same words the Hilton staff had once said. He didn't have to do that. The legend became a mirror, not a monument. What if greatness isn't how high the world lifts you, but how softly you lift the world? As sunlight spilled fully into the room, Elvis took one last look at the strip. "You think they'll remember the songs or the moments?" he asked. Red answered quietly. "Both, maybe. But one will mean more." The king nodded. The city below roared back to life. Cars, horns, laughter. But in that brief heartbeat before the noise reclaimed everything, there was peace. And somewhere between the marble floors and the morning light, Elvis Presley left behind his real crown, made not of jewels, but of grace. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness has gone out of style. Remember, one quiet act can outlive every spotlight. For more true moments that shaped legends, not just the music, but the humanity behind it, stay with us, because the next story begins where this one leaves its echo.